In the quiet pre-dawn hours of August 21st, 2024, an ordinary street in Bradford, England, was ripped apart by a vision straight from hell. A house on Westbury Road, home to a young mother and her 3 small children, was swallowed by a fire so violent, so sudden, that neighbours would later say the sky lit up as if it were struck by lightning. It was a city's nightmare, an unimaginable tragedy that stole 4 innocent lives. 29-year-old Bryonie Gawith, her 9-year-old daughter Dynasty, her 5-year-old son Oscar, and her baby girl 22-month-old Aubrey. At first, it could have been a random, catastrophic event, but as investigators sifted through the blackened ruins of the family home, they found the embers of this fire weren't sparked by an accident. They were ignited by a cold, calculated, and venomous act of revenge. This is the story of how a house of refuge became a tomb, and how a quest for vengeance against one person resulted in the annihilation of an entire family. And as the harrowing details unfold in a courtroom right now, a community is forced to confront a terrifying reality. How quickly the poison of a broken relationship can spread, and just how devastating the consequences can be when jealousy is armed with a can of petrol and a lighter. Westbury Road is like so many residential streets in Bradford. It's a place of brick homes, of families starting their day, of children's toys left in front yards. But in the early hours of August 21st, 2024, that comforting normality was shattered. Just before 2 a.m., the silence was broken not by a gradual alarm, but by an explosion of light and sound. The home where Bryonie Gawith lived with her kids erupted in a catastrophic blaze. Neighbours, startled from their sleep, ran to their windows to witness pure horror. Flames were devouring the front of the house, climbing the walls with an unnatural speed that painted the night sky an apocalyptic orange. Screams were heard, but they were lost in the roar of the fire. The first calls to emergency services were frantic, choked with panic. In an astonishing 6 minutes, police and fire crews were on the scene, but they were already fighting a losing battle. The inferno was too intense, too established. The front of the house was a solid wall of fire, making any immediate entry impossible. The first police officers to arrive made a desperate attempt. They found one man, horrendously burned, and managed to pull him from the raging fire. That man, later identified as 40-year-old Sharaz Ali, was alive, but just barely. But where were the others? Where were Bryonie and her children? Standing outside in a state of shock and terror was Bryonie's sister, Antonia Gawith. She had escaped, but her sister, her nieces, her nephew, they were still inside. Firefighters battled the blaze with everything they had, but the fire, fed by an accelerant, was merciless. By the time they could finally gain control and enter the home, it was far too late. The home was a charred skeleton, and the lives inside had been extinguished. A pathologist would later deliver the only merciful detail in this entire grim story. Bryonie Gawith and her 3 children, Dynasty, Oscar and Aubrey, had been rendered unconscious by toxic fumes long before the flames ever reached them. They succumbed to the poisonous smoke that filled their home in seconds. The scale of the loss was staggering. A mother and her 3 babies gone. A house of memories turned to ash. For the city of Bradford and for the family torn apart, it was the beginning of an agonizing search for answers. Was this faulty wiring? A tragic accident? Or was it something far, far worse? The presence of one survivor, Antonia, and one burned man pulled from the flames, Sharaz Ali, pointed to a story that was anything but accidental. Before this case became a stack of court documents and news headlines, it was about a family. It was about a mother who loved her children, and 3 young lives filled with promise and laughter, and a future that was stolen from them in the most brutal way imaginable. To really understand the depth of this tragedy, you have to understand who was lost. Bryonie Gawith was 29 years old. In photos, she's always smiling, the clear and present heart of her young family. She was a mother, a sister, a daughter. In the days before the fire, she had done what any good sister would do. She'd opened her home to someone she loved who was in desperate need. Her sister Antonia had just ended a long and troubled relationship and needed a safe place to go. Bryonie provided that refuge without a second thought. It was an act of profound love and loyalty, a testament to her character. She was creating a safe harbour for her sister, unknowingly placing her own family directly in the path of a storm. Her final act was one of compassion, an act that would, through a twisted path of rage and revenge, lead to her and her children's deaths. Dennisty Birtle was 9 years old. At 9, the world is just starting to open up. You have your own friends, your favourite subjects in school, your own secrets. You're on the cusp of leaving childhood behind, but still young enough to believe in magic. Dennisty was at that vibrant age, a big sister to 2 younger siblings with her whole life stretching out in front of her. Oscar Birtle was 5. 5 is the age of kindergarten, of learning to write your name, of superheroes and boundless energy. It is an age of pure innocence. For Oscar, his world was his mother, his sisters, and his home. His life was a chapter book with only the first few pages written. And then there was Aubrey Birtle, just 22 months old, not even 2, a toddler just learning to piece together sentences and run on unsteady legs. Her entire existence was one of comfort, warmth, and the constant presence of her mother and siblings. She was the baby of the family, cherished and protected. These were not abstract names on a victim list. They were a family unit, a small constellation of lives orbiting a loving mother. They were a picture of what so many of us strive for, a home filled with the chaos and joy of young children. When the fire tore through their home, it didn't just burn down a building. It erased a future. It silenced the laughter of 3 children and extinguished the life of the woman who brought them into the world. And the motive for this fire, as prosecutors would later allege, had nothing to do with them. They were, in the cold calculus of revenge, collateral damage. And that fact, perhaps more than any other, is what makes this case a city's absolute nightmare. In the cold light of a day, with smoke still hanging in the air, the work of the investigators began. The shell of the Westbury Road house was now a crime scene, a complex and heartbreaking puzzle. For arson investigators, the first task is to find the fire's origin. They sift through debris, analyse burn patterns and look for telltale signs. And here, the signs were immediate and undeniable. The fire had started too fast and burned way too hot. This wasn't the slow burn of an electrical fault or a forgotten candle. This was the work of an accelerant. The discovery of a melted petrol canister and the chemical traces of gasoline shifted the investigation from a tragic accident to a deliberate criminal act. This was arson, and with 4 deaths, it was now a mass murder investigation. The human pieces of the puzzle were just as critical. There was Antonia Gawith, the sole survivor from inside the house, who was now the key witness, and there was Sharaz Ali, the man pulled from the flames, clinging to life in a hospital bed. The link between them was immediately obvious. Antonia and Sharaz had just ended a turbulent 7-year relationship. When Antonia gave her statement to the police, the idea of a random attack completely fell apart. She told them about the abusive nature of her relationship with Ali, made worse by his drinking and drug use. She had finally found the courage to leave him and sought refuge with her sister Bryonie just days before the fire. This wasn't some stranger who targeted the house. The prosecution would come to argue this was an act of domestic terrorism, a targeted attack born from jealousy and rage. With Ali in the hospital and unable to be questioned, the police had to figure out who helped him. How did he get to the house? Investigators turned to the silent witnesses of our modern world, CCTV and doorbell cameras. They began tracing the likely route from Ali's known associates in the nearby town of Keighley to Westbury Road in Bradford. And they found it. Footage showed a blue Skoda making the late-night journey. It showed the car stopping at a Shell petrol station where a second man got out and filled a large canister with petrol. This man wasn't Sharaz Ali. Police identified him as Calum Sunderland, a 26-year-old from Keighley. The digital trail led them right to Bryonie's front door. A Ring doorbell camera from the property captured the final, chilling moments before the inferno. The footage showed Calum Sunderland walking up to the house, petrol can in hand. Prosecutors say that on the instruction of Sharaz Ali, who was with him just off camera, Sunderland kicked the front door in. The video then shows him turning and running away. The police now had two primary suspects, Sharaz Ali, the alleged mastermind, and Calum Sunderland, the man on the doorbell camera. A manhunt was launched for Sunderland, and on August 26th, just 5 days after the fire, they found him hiding in the basement of a house in Keighley. Body cam footage from his arrest shows a man who seems shocked when he's told he's being arrested on suspicion of murder. Police also identified the driver of the blue Skoda, a third man named Mohammed Shabir, aged 44. The investigation had successfully identified a trio who, according to the prosecution, conspired together that night. They had a motive, a timeline from CCTV, and the crime itself captured on a doorbell camera. The case was now ready to move from the streets of Bradford into a court of law. As the trial against Sharaz Ali and Calum Sunderland began in November 2025, the prosecution, led by David Brooke KC, laid out a narrative that was far more sinister than a simple act of rage. This was not, they argued, a spontaneous crime. This was a planned plot to exact the ultimate revenge. The target was Antonia Gawith. The motive, they said, was pure jealousy. The relationship between Sharaz Ali and Antonia Gawith was dissected in court. They had been together for 7 years in what was described as an abusive relationship, exacerbated by his drinking. Antonia told the court about a pattern of physical assault and controlling behaviour. The breaking point came in August 2024. While Antonia was on holiday with her sister Bryonie and the children, a drunken Ali called her, starting another argument. That was the final straw. She ended the relationship and sought safety at her sister's home. According to the prosecution, Ali couldn't accept the breakup. He sent a barrage of texts. Some were friendly, but many, especially when he was drinking, turned aggressive and hostile. He was, as the prosecutor put it, a man motivated by jealousy and fueled by drink and drugs, who decided to take revenge on his ex-partner Antonia, regardless of the potential consequences for others. The plot, as outlined in court, was chillingly methodical. On the night of August 20th, Ali allegedly started putting his plan into motion. He contacted Calum Sunderland, a 26-year-old who, by his own admission, was a crack cocaine addict with a history of committing arson for hire to fund his habit. The prosecution claimed Ali saw Sunderland as a man who was easily bought. Ali also allegedly enlisted 44-year-old Mohammed Shabir to be the driver. The trio met in Keighley around 1 a.m. and got into Shabir's blue Skoda. Their first stop was the petrol station, where Sunderland filled the canister. Then they drove to Westbury Road and parked just out of sight. This is where the story splits into two competing narratives: the prosecution's allegations and the defendant's claims. The prosecution's version is stark. They allege Ali and Sunderland walked to the house. Ali, knowing Antonia was inside, told Sunderland to carry the petrol and a lighter, then commanded him, "Kick the door in." Sunderland did as he was told, breaking down the front door before immediately turning and fleeing back to the car where Shabir was waiting. What happened next was the heart of the atrocity. The prosecution claims Ali went into the house alone. Inside, he found Antonia. He began pouring petrol around the room and horrifically directly onto Antonia herself. The court heard that a terrified Antonia saw her sister Bryonie, woken by the noise, appear and bravely try to intervene, kicking Ali as he moved towards the stairs. Antonia ran to the back of the house, but the door, which had a history of jamming, wouldn't open. As she desperately kicked at it, trying to escape, she heard her sister on the phone calling 999. It was at that moment that Ali, still inside, used his lighter to ignite the petrol fumes. The house exploded into life. Ali was caught in the blaze he'd started, suffering the severe burns that led to his rescue by police. Sunderland and Shabir, having watched it all unfold from the car, sped away, leaving 4 people to die. The plot was a catastrophic success in its destructive power, but a failure in its intent. The one person it was designed to kill, Antonia Gawith, was the only one to escape. But in his alleged quest to punish her, Ali had instead murdered her sister and her 3 innocent children. The trial has forced the 2 surviving defendants, Sharaz Ali and Calum Sunderland, to answer for that night. Both men deny the 4 counts of murder and the attempted murder of Antonia Gawith. Their defences paint very different pictures. One of a suicide attempt gone tragically wrong, the other of a hired hand who claims he was completely duped. Calum Sunderland's defence is that he was a pawn, not a partner. On the stand, Sunderland, a self-confessed crack cocaine addict, told the jury he was approached by Ali and Shabir with a simple offer: light up a car for a few £100s. He claimed he'd done this before to fund his drug habit and saw it as just another job. He testified that Ali explicitly told him the residents of the house were away on holiday. The plan, as he understood it, was to burn a car in a garage at the back of the property. His lawyer argued his actions were consistent with this story. He kicked in the door on Ali's command, but immediately fled. He never entered the house. He never saw the people inside. "I would never have gone if I had known there were people in the house," Sunderland told the court. He claimed his guilt was not in committing murder, but in being foolish enough to get involved. When prosecutors questioned him about why his story changed during police interviews, he said he lied because he was terrified. "I didn't want to be accused of murder. I felt ashamed. I felt like it were my fault," he said. The prosecution, however, relentlessly challenged this. David Brooke KC confronted Sunderland, suggesting it was unbelievable he would carry a can of petrol and a lighter to a house at 2 a.m. without knowing the real intention. The cross-examination grew so tense that on December 2nd, 2025, the trial halted when Sunderland abruptly turned away from the prosecutor and said, "I'm going back. Honestly, I'm done. I can't do this." Sharaz Ali's defence is perhaps even more startling. He admits starting the fire, but claims it was an attempt to end his own life, not to harm anyone else. His lawyer told the court that Ali went to the house that night intending to set himself on fire in front of Antonia. He wanted her to witness his despair over their breakup. "Because I love her and I want to see her," Ali reportedly stated. In Ali's version of events, he lied to Sunderland and Shabir, telling them they were just going to put fuel in his sister's car. He claims he never poured petrol on Antonia or around the house. Instead, he alleges that after he entered, he and Antonia got into a struggle over the petrol can. During this fight, he claims, petrol accidentally spilled onto both of them and the floor. When he ignited his lighter, intending only to set himself on fire, the spilled fumes caused the catastrophic explosion he never intended. He described it as his biggest regret to this day. The prosecution has furiously attacked this defence as a self-serving lie, completely contradicted by Antonia's testimony. They point to the aggressive texts he sent right before the fire as proof of a vengeful, not suicidal state of mind. A third man, Mohammed Shabir, the alleged driver, will never face a jury. He was charged alongside Ali and Sunderland but died from a heart attack while on remand awaiting trial. He had pleaded not guilty to all charges. Right now, the trial is still ongoing. The jury has heard the harrowing 999 call made by Bryonie, the desperate testimony from her sister, and the conflicting accounts of the 2 men in the dock. Their task is to untangle this web of jealousy, lies, and blame. Was it a revenge plot that killed 4 innocent people? Or was it a tragic, unforeseen consequence of one man's despair and another's greed? The fate of 2 men hangs in the balance as a city waits for justice. This case is about more than just one fire, one night of horror. It shines a harsh light on the devastating ripple effect of domestic violence. This fire wasn't a random act. Prosecutors argue it was the final, explosive chapter in a long story of jealousy, abuse, and control. It serves as a gut-wrenching lesson in how the terror of an abusive relationship rarely stays contained to just two people. The relationship between Sharaz Ali and Antonia Gawith, as detailed in court, had the classic, terrifying hallmarks of domestic abuse. There were allegations of physical assaults and controlling behaviour fueled by substance abuse. When Antonia made the courageous decision to leave, she did what countless victims are forced to do. She sought refuge with her family. Her sister Bryonie provided that safe haven. This single act of love and support is what makes the outcome so profoundly tragic. Bryonie was not involved in the relationship. Her children, Dynasty, Oscar, and Aubrey, were completely innocent bystanders. Yet they became the ultimate victims. Their home, which was supposed to be a sanctuary for Antonia, was turned into the epicenter of Ali's alleged rage. The prosecution's argument that Ali decided to take revenge regardless of the potential consequences for others speaks to a chillingly common mindset. When abusers lose control over their primary victim, they often lash out at what that person holds most dear to inflict the maximum possible pain. In this case, that meant targeting Antonia's family. This case highlights the extreme danger that victims and their support systems face, not just during a relationship, but especially in the period right after leaving. The act of leaving is often the most dangerous time, as it represents the ultimate loss of control for an abuser, which can trigger a violent and sometimes lethal escalation. It's why advocacy groups stress that we all must recognize the warning signs: jealousy, possessiveness, isolation, verbal and physical abuse. The fire on Westbury Road is a stark reminder that the phrase domestic violence can be misleading. It sounds contained, private, something that happens behind one closed door. But the reality is that it bleeds out, affecting friends, family, and entire communities. Bryonie Gawith died because she tried to protect her sister. Her children died simply because they were home. Their deaths underscore a vital and urgent message. Supporting a victim of abuse requires a community-wide safety net, and the failure to intervene can have consequences more devastating than anyone can imagine. The details of this case are incredibly difficult to hear, but understanding the dynamics of such tragedies is crucial. If you found this analysis important, please consider subscribing for more in-depth explorations of complex cases. And if you or anyone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know that there is help available. Confidential support is available 24/7 through national and local hotlines. You are not alone. As the trial of Sharaz Ali and Calum Sunderland continues, a jury will soon be tasked with delivering a verdict. But no matter the outcome, the scars on the Bradford community and on the surviving family will remain. The story of the Westbury Road fire is one of unimaginable loss, a story of how a mother's love and her children's futures were turned to ash by an act of violent jealousy. It stands as a harrowing testament to the fact that the victims of domestic abuse are not only those in the relationship, but also the innocent people who stand by them. Bryonie Gawith's final days were defined by her compassion for her sister. Her legacy, and that of her beautiful children, now serves as a tragic and urgent call to action, a demand that we as a society do more to see the warning signs, to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that a family's home never again becomes a battleground for someone else's war. As the legal process continues, life in some sense has to go on for Bryonie's family and friends, but normal is never coming back. They've held vigils, they've stood outside the burnt-out house on Westbury Road, laying flowers and balloons, reading messages, crying together. They've organised fundraisers and funerals, chosen colourful clothes instead of all black because that's what B would have wanted, and tried to give her and the children the best send-off they could. In tributes, they talk about Bryonie's love of music and dancing, Dynasty's personality and friendships, including how she was best friends with her cousin, Oscar's cheekiness, and Aubrey being so young that many of their memories of her are still just little flashes. A look, a laugh, a shared joke. Their names, Bryonie, Dynasty, Oscar, Aubrey, are now tied forever to that house on Westbury Road. But for the people who loved them, they're much more than victims in a headline or evidence in a trial. They're a daughter, grandchildren, a fiancé, nieces, nephew, friends, classmates. And that, in the end, is why cases like this matter. Not because of the courtroom drama, not because of the shocking allegations, but because 4 lives that should have held so many ordinary everyday moments, first days at school, birthdays, silly dances in the kitchen, ended in a way that feels senseless. At the time I'm recording this, the trial of Sharaz Ali and Calum Sunderland is still ongoing at Doncaster Crown Court. Both men deny murder and attempted murder, and they are presumed innocent unless and until a jury finds them guilty. Whatever the final verdicts, the fact remains that 4 people died in that house fire in the early hours of 21st August 2024. For Bryonie's family, there is no outcome that can undo that. I'd really like to know what you think about this case, especially about the way domestic abuse, jealousy and threats can escalate into catastrophic violence. Do you think our systems do enough to recognise the risk when someone says, "He's threatened me," or "He won't leave me alone"? Let me know your thoughts, but please keep the comments respectful, particularly to the family and friends who might one day see discussions like this. If you'd like more in-depth coverage of cases like this, where we take the time to look beyond the headline and into the context, the patterns, and the unanswered questions, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and never stop listening for the murmurs of crime. Bye for now.